Now we're heading into the new school year, 2021-2022. And the USDA is extending the free meals for all students. So my simplified understanding is that you have to collect or tally an accurate count of the number of meals you serve and provide auditable reports based on the information. So can you explain in more detail what this means in your food service world and how you run your operation?
Okay, so and I'm not saying this, and you and I had this conversation unrecorded prior because you had questions, and I told you what made my job simpler going forward was that we use the biometric systems. And the reason that makes it simplistic is because we use a company called Primero for our point of sale. But I would like to think that most point of sale systems are able to zero out the reimbursable meal cost. So that way, whenever it rings up as zero. So what happens is because we have the biometrics, a student can walk through, place their finger on the scanner, it reads them, it tallies the meal served without having to ring in dollars and cents. Now, if you had a more simplistic system that did not enable you to have the system zeroed out, it then just becomes an accounting error where you would back out the dollar amount, but you would still have an accurate accounting of the meal served because of the biometrics of it.
Right.
So in essence, what we'll do is when we open up in September, we will have our cafeterias operating with whatever the CDC guidelines are. If they require 6 foot, 3 foot, or no social distancing, whether they require barriers, no barriers, masks, no masks, is irrelevant. Because what's going to happen is they're going to go through the line. Their meals, whether it's breakfast or lunch, will be in high schools will be offer versus serve. In elementary will be probably a full pre-plate and not offer versus serve. And because of the way we work it with the biometric scanning, the cashier will not have the dilemma of identifying whether it's a reimbursable meal, because they're going to most likely, as the experience has been, is take more food than they might normally. So they may take a little more fruit or a little more vegetable. So that really hasn't been an issue for us. And it really does make it work very seamlessly. And it is very streamlined as far as the expedience of getting them through, because the last thing you really want to do based on the pandemic is have people backed up in line, standing, face to face. You want them to process through the line as quickly as possible. And that's why I said to you that that's what I liked about our system that we used. And as you know, we were, one of the earlier ones in New Jersey to go with the biometric scanning, because we recognized the value of it. We did not see it as a value in the pandemic. And we were, if we didn't have it going forward, it would have been quite a challenge to figure out how we're going to do it and how we're going to get better accountability. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're not overclaiming, or we're not just saying that we're giving meals out, and the kid's getting 2 or 3 meals, because that's not the nature and the spirit of the whole program. And this gives us that extra layer so that we can provide that accountability to our state officials, so that they feel comfortable that the benefit that they're providing us is being disseminated correctly, effectively, and cost effectively, which will certainly, hopefully, enable them to do this going forward. Because when you think about it, at the end of the day, breakfast and lunch are an important aspect of education.
Certainly.
Everything else in education is free. Breakfast and lunch should be as well. But we need to have the tools to be able to have the reconciliation and the accountability, other than just a piece of paper that says we prepared it. We need to be able to tie that together by showing that we served it. And that's what the system that we have in place does.
Right. And that was like the curious point that you were saying that I had to wrap my head around and understand, which you explained so well, is that your production records have to match your meal counts. Correct. And that's why using identiMetrics, using the finger scanning system, allows you to seamlessly provide those auditable records.
And that's what it does. It gives me my system gives me a very nice spreadsheet on what it is. And there's always the issue where the child's hand is too dry or too wet or whatever it is, and it doesn't read. But that's the exception, not the norm. So it really expedites the flow, and more so, in normal service, the flow is important. But in a pandemic situation or post-pandemic situation, getting kids through expeditiously is even more important, because you really don't want to have that bottleneck where they're standing there and talking and having that interaction. And then after it's all said and done, my managers will hit the button And that will give them a report of what was actually served that day. And then they can take that report and they can reconcile it against their production records, which from an accounting point is great for our business office, but from a state or federal standpoint, it's great because then if they come in and they say, well, your production record says you serve 100 meals and you only have 107 kids and your normal participation rate is 40% and you're serving 96%, where does that go? You're having a difficult time. Well, there could be up that high just because of the need of the community that you're servicing. But you have no way of reconciling that. If you have this system that we use, then you have that extra layer that you can reconcile. You can say, here's my actual service report. And it also gives you the opportunity to sell snacks.
Yes.
Because even though the SSO gives you free meals, you still have a greater opportunity to sell snacks and ancillary items that you would not normally serve as we do now with grab and go. We don't offer any snacks because we don't have the opportunity to.
Some people have called and said, we potentially might try to use a clicker or a tally, and they're not sure what way to go.
The problem with that is if the clicker, as you call it, doesn't tie to the production records,
right,
then you have a problem. So then either they're not claiming all the meals that they actually serve, or they're claiming more meals than they serve.
Sure.
And there's too much ability for there to be overclaiming or underclaiming. And realistically, you want to be accurate. Mm-hmm. You want to claim the meals you serve because you need to get paid because food service entities are required to be self-sufficient. So if you're not getting the money that you need for the food that you're serving, you're not covering your overhead, you're not covering your labor, you're not covering your food costs, and therefore you're losing money. And in a given amount of time, you'll be out of business. And then on the same token, if you're serving less meals than you should be, then the kids that need it and have food insecurity are not getting. And you have no way to reconcile that with a clicker or a spreadsheet or a production record. The only way we can do that is by actually getting that child through the line and having them scan through, whether it's by a PIN number, whether it's by telling the cafeteria lady. But the most flawless way to do it is is by the scan. Once you've scanned them in, there's no way. I've had many parents call, my child didn't buy that. Well, it shows that 1037 that little Johnny came through the line and he scanned. Oh, because if it's you're using a PIN or a swipe card, I can give my swipe card or PIN to somebody else. And quite honestly, most people are not checking if there's a photo on it. And usually the photos aren't great enough to be able to identify if they're similar looking. You have 3 kids with brown hair and brown eyes, and if you're not spending the time to really look at it, these are not high resolution pictures on your photo IDs.
Yeah, talk about a bottleneck, right?
Yeah. That slows it down, and then everybody behind them now are congregating and talking and potentially spreading particulates and not necessarily being as safe as they could be.
So is this different, like different districts like different rules for different districts nationwide, or how does that kind of factor out around the country?
Well, I know every state has their own rules and regulations as they revolve around commodities and compliance as far as what the federal government says. But at the end of the day, it can't be less stringent than the federal regulations. It has to be more stringent.
Right.
So at minimum, it meets the federal regulation. If you have, New Jersey has one of the more stringent and more data-driven food service program requirements in the country. So if it works here, it pretty much will work everywhere else.
Okay, so here's the big question. And now I'm going to address the elephant in the room, right? So we know COVID's airborne, right? It's May of 2021. All the experts have finally,
you want me to put my mask on?
What's that?
Did you need me to put my mask on?
No.
Okay, because I was vaccinated and I had it, so you don't have to worry. We're not that close.
We're not that close for real. But we know that they've all confirmed there's not one contraction, not one documented case of a fomite or a surface transmission of COVID. We know that overcleaning of surfaces is really all like hygiene theater, and we really should be focusing on better ventilation and filtration. But there's still those that think touchless is a thing. So is this an issue in your district? And if so, like
it's
how
not,
are you doing
because
it?
we sanitized our touch pads regularly anyway.
Yep.
So, I mean, for me, it's really not an issue.
It's like business as usual.
Yeah, I see it as enabling me to keep it closer to business as usual than having it as a business as unusual.
Good. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. There are all of my questions.
Great.